Sometimes the person who changes your life arrives on the exact day you decide to run from it. The church bells were still ringing when I pushed through the side door and stepped into the rain. The sound followed me down the stone steps like an accusation, echoing across the parking lot where rows of expensive cars sat gleaming beneath gray afternoon clouds. My wedding dress instantly soaked through. Water clung to the lace sleeves and dragged at the hem as I ran. I didn't care. 20 minutes earlier, I had been standing in a bridal suite surrounded by flowers, smiling relatives, and women telling me how lucky I was. Then I saw the text message. One message. One photo. One truth that shattered everything. The man waiting for me at the altar wasn't the man I thought he was. Maybe I should have gone inside and confronted him. Maybe I should have demanded answers. Instead, I ran. I was 26 years old, standing in the middle of downtown Manhattan in a wedding dress worth more than my monthly rent, with no plan beyond putting as much distance between myself and that church as possible. Rain pounded the sidewalks. Yellow cabs splashed through puddles. People stared as I hurried down the street, clutching the skirt of my dress. My makeup was probably ruined. My hair definitely was. At that moment, none of it mattered. My chest felt tight. Not because I was crying. Strangely, I wasn't. I felt numb. Like my entire future had been erased with a single swipe across a phone screen. I crossed 2 intersections without paying attention to the lights. Horns sounded behind me. Someone shouted. I kept moving. The city blurred around me beneath sheets of rain. After 10 blocks, my shoes were soaked. After 15, my feet hurt. After 20, I realized I had absolutely nowhere to go. My parents lived in Ohio. My apartment lease had ended last month because I was supposed to move into my fiancé's penthouse after the honeymoon. Most of my friends were currently sitting inside that church wondering why the bride had disappeared. I stopped beneath the awning of a closed coffee shop and finally allowed myself to breathe. The rain fell harder. Cold wind swept through the avenue. Across the street, towering office buildings vanished behind gray mist. That's when I noticed the black SUV. It sat parked along the curb half a block away. At first, I thought nothing of it. Manhattan was full of luxury vehicles. But then the engine started. Headlights flickered on. Slowly, deliberately, the SUV pulled away from the curb. It crossed the empty lane and rolled toward me. My stomach tightened. The vehicle stopped directly in front of the awning. A sleek black Escalade. Tinted windows so dark they looked almost reflective. For several seconds, nothing happened. Rain hammered against the roof. Water streamed down the windshield. Then the rear passenger door opened. A man stepped out. He looked like he belonged on the cover of a magazine nobody ordinary people could afford. Tall. Dark hair brushed neatly back. A tailored charcoal coat. Polished shoes untouched by the weather. He glanced once at my wedding dress, then at the church visible in the distance behind me. His expression didn't change. Somehow that made him even more intimidating. There was something calm about him. Controlled. Like nothing in the world surprised him anymore. I should have walked away. Every instinct told me to keep moving. Instead, I stood frozen beneath the awning as he studied me with cool gray-blue eyes. Then something unexpected happened. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Not a smile. Not exactly. More like amusement. As if he had just stumbled across an opportunity nobody else could see. His gaze lingered on my soaked dress before returning to my face. Finally, he spoke. His voice was smooth and confident, carrying easily through the rain. You're late. Sometimes a single sentence can sound less like a greeting and more like a warning. You're late. The words hung between us while rain poured from the gray sky in endless sheets. For a moment, I simply stared at him. Then I laughed. It was not because anything was funny. It was the kind of laugh that escaped when a day had already gone so wrong that reality no longer felt real. Excuse me? I asked. The man glanced toward the distant church tower before looking back at me. I was expecting someone else, he said calmly. Apparently fate had different plans. I frowned. I think you have the wrong person. That is possible. His voice remained smooth and measured. But judging by the wedding dress, I would say you are having a worse day than I am. I folded my arms against the cold wind. What exactly do you want? Instead of answering immediately, he studied me. Not in an uncomfortable way. More like he was solving a puzzle. Behind him, I noticed another man sitting in the front passenger seat of the Escalade. Dark suit. Earpiece. Watching everything. Suddenly, every instinct told me to leave. This was New York. A stranger in a luxury SUV approaching a runaway bride was not normal. Nothing about this situation was normal. I stepped away from the awning. Thank you, but I am fine. The man's expression barely changed. No, you're not. I hated that he was right. My soaked dress clung heavily to my legs. My feet hurt. My future had just collapsed. But hearing it out loud from a complete stranger made irritation flare inside me. You do not know anything about me. You are standing in the rain wearing a wedding dress while trying not to cry. He tilted his head slightly. I know enough. Before I could respond, headlights appeared at the far end of the block. A black sedan turned the corner and slowed near the church entrance. My stomach tightened instantly. I recognized the vehicle. It belonged to my former fiancé's brother. Apparently, people had started looking for me. The stranger noticed my reaction. His eyes followed mine toward the approaching car. Something sharp flickered behind his calm expression. Understanding. He said quietly. Now that makes sense. I hated how quickly panic returned. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe they only wanted answers. But I was not ready to explain anything. I was not ready to face anyone. Not yet. The sedan continued moving down the avenue. Slowly. Searching. The stranger opened the rear passenger door of the SUV. Get in. I blinked. Absolutely not. His mouth twitched again. Almost a smile. You're stubborn. You are a stranger. Fair point. Rain splashed across the sidewalk between us. The sedan was getting closer. My pulse began to race. Look, he said, lowering his voice slightly. You can stand here and explain yourself to whoever is looking for you. Or you can sit inside a warm vehicle for 10 minutes and decide what comes next. I hesitated. Every self-preservation instinct argued against accepting help from a man I did not know. Yet every practical instinct reminded me that I had nowhere else to go. The sedan slowed another 20 yards away. I could almost make out the driver through the windshield. The stranger waited patiently. No pressure. No threats. Just quiet confidence. As though he already knew what choice I would make. Finally, I exhaled. 10 minutes. 10 minutes, he agreed. Reluctantly, I climbed into the SUV. The leather seats were warm. The interiors smelled faintly of cedar and expensive cologne. The door closed behind me with a soft click, shutting out the storm. The stranger entered beside me. Up close, he seemed even more composed. The kind of man who never rushed because the world adjusted itself around him. The vehicle pulled away from the curb. I stared through the rain-streaked window as the church disappeared behind us. After several silent moments, I realized something. Neither man had introduced himself. Who are you? I asked. The stranger looked at me. For the first time, his expression became unreadable. Then he answered. Adrian Romano. The name hit the air like a stone dropped into still water. Because even I knew exactly who Adrian Romano was. Some names carry the weight of entire cities. Adrian Romano was one of them. I stared at him, wondering if I had heard correctly. Every New Yorker had heard rumors. Business magazines called him a brilliant investor. Financial reporters called him a private billionaire. The internet called him mysterious. Depending on who was telling the story, he was either a visionary entrepreneur or a man powerful enough to make problems disappear without ever raising his voice. I had never expected to meet him, especially not while wearing a soaked wedding dress in the back of his SUV. You are Adrian Romano? I asked. He nodded once. That is usually how introductions work. I should have laughed. Instead, I felt my stomach tighten. The vehicle moved smoothly through Manhattan traffic while rain streaked across the windows. You look disappointed, he said. I am trying to decide if this day can get any stranger. That is a reasonable concern. His calmness was almost irritating. Nothing seemed to shake him. Meanwhile, my entire life felt like it had been thrown into a blender. I looked out the window and watched familiar streets slide past. "Why did you stop for me?" I finally asked. Adrian leaned back slightly. "Because you looked like someone who needed an exit." That is not an answer. It is the truth. The man in the front passenger seat remained silent, focused on the road ahead. The atmosphere inside the SUV felt strangely controlled. Nobody rushed. Nobody interrupted. Even the silence seemed intentional. My phone had been left behind at the church. No messages. No calls. No explanations. For the first time all afternoon, that reality hit me. Everyone was probably searching for me. My parents. My friends. My former fiancé. The thought made my chest ache. Adrian noticed immediately. "You are thinking about going back." "I am thinking about the disaster I created." "No." His voice was quiet. "You are thinking about the disaster someone else created." I looked at him sharply. "You do not know what happened. You ran from your own wedding." He folded his hands calmly. "People do not usually do that because everything is going well." I hated how logical that sounded. The city lights reflected across the dark interior. We crossed Midtown and continued south. Finally, I turned back toward him. "Where are we going?" "Nowhere important." That is not reassuring. For the first time, a genuine smile appeared. Brief. Controlled. Unexpectedly human. Good. It was not intended to be. A few seconds later, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. Something shifted in his expression. Not concern. More like confirmation. "Interesting." "What?" I asked. He set the phone down. "Your fiancé has already given interviews." I blinked. "Interviews?" "Apparently you suffered an emotional breakdown and disappeared." Heat rushed to my face. "What?" Adrian handed me the phone. An online news article filled the screen. My wedding photo sat beside a headline describing me as a distressed bride who had abandoned the ceremony unexpectedly. The quotes beneath came directly from my former fiancé. Every word painted him as a worried victim. Every sentence made me look unstable. My hands tightened around the phone. "That is not what happened." "I know." The certainty in Adrian's voice caught me off guard. "How?" He held my gaze for several seconds. "Because people who are guilty usually talk first." I looked back at the article. Anger slowly replaced heartbreak. Then another realization hit me. My reputation. My job. My future. Everything could be damaged by a story I had no way to stop. Adrian seemed to read the thought before I spoke it. He glanced toward the rain-covered skyline beyond the window. Then he said something that made my pulse stop for a second. "It appears we both have a problem, Sophie." I frowned. "What problem could someone like you possibly have?" Adrian looked directly at me. The amusement returned to his eyes. "I need a wife." For a full 3 seconds, I was convinced I had misheard him. The SUV continued through the rain while Manhattan blurred outside the windows, and Adrian Romano sat across from me looking completely serious. "You need a wife?" I repeated. "Yes." That might be the strangest sentence anyone has said to me today. "Considering the day you have had, that is impressive." I stared at him. "You cannot possibly be serious." "I assure you, Sophie, I rarely joke about legal matters." Legal matters. Somehow that made the conversation even worse. I rubbed my forehead and looked away. The city lights reflected across the glass. Somewhere behind us, my abandoned wedding was becoming a headline. Somewhere ahead of us, apparently, a billionaire was discussing marriage like a business transaction. "No," I said. Adrian raised an eyebrow. "No, no. You have not even heard the proposal." "I do not need to hear the proposal. Most people like details before rejecting opportunities." I almost laughed. "Marriage is not an opportunity. Sometimes it is." His calmness was infuriating. I folded my arms. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly. I run away from my wedding. I get into a stranger's SUV. Then the stranger turns out to be Adrian Romano and asks me to become his wife. Temporarily." I blinked. That was supposed to make it sound better? For the first time, the man in the front seat looked like he was trying not to smile. Adrian remained completely composed. You need protection from a public disaster. I need assistance solving a public problem. Our interests align. That sounds exactly like something a billionaire would say. Thank you. That was not a compliment. The vehicle turned into a quieter part of the city. Tall buildings gave way to private entrances and discreet security gates. Everything looked expensive. Everything looked far outside my world. My stomach tightened. Why would someone like you need a wife? Adrian glanced toward the rain. For the first time since I met him, his expression became thoughtful. Because there are people watching my decisions very closely. Business rivals? Something like that. His answer felt carefully chosen. Not dishonest. Just incomplete. I noticed that he never seemed to volunteer more information than necessary. The SUV slowed beneath the covered entrance of a luxury building. Uniformed staff immediately appeared with umbrellas. Nobody seemed surprised to see Adrian. The vehicle stopped. Where are we? I asked. Somewhere safe. That is not an address. You are correct. Before I could argue further, Adrian opened the door and stepped out into the rain. One of the attendants rushed forward with an umbrella. He ignored it and turned back toward me instead. Come inside. I am not agreeing to anything. I know. I am serious. So am I. His gray-blue eyes held mine steadily. There was no pressure in them. No demand. Just certainty. Somehow that was even harder to resist. I looked down at my soaked wedding dress. My ruined day. My uncertain future. Then I looked at the man standing outside in the rain as if he already knew something I did not. Slowly, I stepped from the SUV. The cold air wrapped around me instantly. Together we walked toward the building entrance. Halfway there, another black vehicle pulled up near the curb. A man hurried out holding a folder. He approached Adrian and quietly handed it to him. Adrian opened it while continuing to walk. Then he stopped. For the first time all evening, I saw genuine surprise cross his face. My pulse quickened. What is it? I asked. Adrian looked down at the papers. Then he looked at me. The calm certainty that had defined him since we met was suddenly gone. That, he said quietly, is not possible. Sometimes the most frightening thing is not a threat. It is a fact that makes no sense. I stood frozen beneath the covered entrance while rain cascaded from the edge of the building behind us. Adrian stared at the documents in his hand with an expression I had not seen before. Uncertainty. It lasted less than a second, but it was there. Then it disappeared. What is not possible? I asked again. Adrian closed the folder. Nothing you need to worry about right now. That is not an answer. I know. Frustration rose immediately. Everyone seemed determined to speak in riddles. The attendant opened the glass doors and warm air drifted into the stormy evening. Adrian motioned toward the lobby. Inside first. I hated that I followed him. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was because I no longer had a better plan. The lobby looked less like an apartment building and more like a luxury hotel. Marble floors reflected crystal chandeliers overhead. Fresh flowers sat on polished tables. Everything smelled faintly of cedar and expensive coffee. People moved quietly through the space, but every single person seemed to recognize Adrian. Some nodded respectfully. Others stepped aside before he even reached them. Nobody questioned his presence. Nobody questioned mine. A woman approached carrying a tablet. Mr. Romano, the board meeting has been moved to tomorrow morning. Adrian nodded. Good. Her eyes briefly landed on my wedding dress. Surprise flashed across her face before professionalism immediately returned. She smiled politely and continued walking. I looked down at myself. Wet lace. Ruined heels. Hair falling loose around my shoulders. I felt completely out of place. Adrian noticed. You were thinking about leaving. You make that sound unreasonable. It is. I stared at him. You barely know me. That has not stopped you from getting into my vehicle. I opened my mouth. Closed it. Unfortunately, he had a point. An elevator opened at the far end of the lobby. We stepped inside together. The doors closed. Silence settled around us as the elevator climbed higher and higher. 30 floors. 40. 50. My ears popped slightly. Finally, the doors opened onto a private residence. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Manhattan glowing beneath the rain. The skyline stretched for miles. It was breathtaking. I hated how breathtaking it was. "This is where you live?" I asked. "Sometimes." That answer somehow felt very Adrian Romano. A woman in her 60s appeared from a nearby hallway. She wore a navy cardigan and reading glasses. Nothing about her suggested luxury or intimidation. She looked more like a favorite librarian. "Adrian," she said warmly. Then she noticed me. Her eyes widened slightly. "Oh." Adrian looked almost uncomfortable. "Margaret, this is Sophie Carter." Margaret's gaze traveled to the wedding dress. Then back to Adrian. A slow smile appeared. "Well," she said. "This is unexpected." I liked her immediately. "You and me both," I replied. That earned a laugh. Adrian looked less amused. Margaret stepped closer and gently touched my arm. "You must be freezing. Come with me." Before I could object, she was already guiding me toward another hallway. Fresh clothes. Hot tea. Then explanations. I glanced back toward Adrian. He was standing near the window staring at the city below. The mysterious folder remained in his hand. Whatever he had read earlier still occupied his thoughts. As Margaret led me away, I noticed something else. Adrian was not looking at the skyline anymore. He was looking directly at me. Not with amusement. Not with calculation. With concern. And somehow that frightened me more than anything else that had happened today. Because people like Adrian Romano did not look concerned without a reason. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the uncomfortable kind. The peaceful kind that only existed in places far removed from ordinary life. Margaret led me into a guest suite larger than my entire apartment. Warm light spilled across hardwood floors. Fresh towels sat folded on a chair. A set of neatly arranged clothes waited on the bed as though someone had anticipated my arrival hours ago. "How is this even possible?" I asked quietly. Margaret smiled. "Around Adrian, people prepare for everything." She handed me a cup of tea. The scent of chamomile drifted upward. "Take your time." After she left, I stood alone in the room staring at my reflection. The woman looking back at me barely resembled the bride who had walked into church that morning. My makeup was gone. My hair hung loose around my shoulders. My future felt uncertain. Yet for the first time all day, I could breathe. An hour later, I emerged wearing a soft gray sweater and dark jeans. The borrowed clothes fit surprisingly well. Another mystery I did not have the energy to solve. The apartment seemed quieter now. I followed the smell of coffee toward the kitchen. What I found stopped me in my tracks. Adrian Romano was standing at a marble counter making tea. Not issuing orders. Not attending meetings. Not commanding an empire. Making tea. He glanced up. "You look better." "I feel less like a drowned wedding cake." The corner of his mouth lifted. Progress. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The city lights glittered beyond the windows. Somewhere below, millions of people continued their lives completely unaware that mine had been turned upside down. Adrian placed a cup on the counter. "Sit." I hesitated before taking a seat. He remained standing. "Margaret tells me you teach third grade." I blinked. "You investigated me?" "Basic research." That is a very alarming phrase. It is a practical phrase. I rolled my eyes. Unexpectedly, he looked amused. Then his expression softened slightly. "You help children." "That is usually how teaching works." "You stayed at the same school for 4 years despite receiving offers elsewhere." I frowned. "How do you know that?" "Because people reveal their priorities through their choices." His gaze shifted briefly toward the skyline. "Most people leave when better opportunities appear. Not everything is about money." The words slipped out before I could stop them. Adrian looked back at me. For a second, I wondered if I had offended him. Instead, he nodded. "I know." The answer surprised me. So did what happened next. A phone buzzed somewhere nearby. Adrian ignored it. Another notification followed. Ignored again. Then another. I stared at him. "You are not going to answer those?" "No." "Why?" "Because I am talking to you." The simplicity of the response caught me off guard. Before I could reply, Margaret entered carrying a tablet. Her expression looked concerned. "Adrian." He accepted the device. I watched his eyes scan the screen. The easy atmosphere vanished instantly. What happened? I asked. Adrian did not answer immediately. His jaw tightened slightly. Margaret looked between us. Finally, Adrian placed the tablet on the counter and turned it toward me. My heart sank. A photograph filled the screen. It showed me leaving the church. Soaked. Distraught. Alone. The headline beneath it was even worse. The story had spread nationwide. But that was not what made Adrian's expression darken. Near the bottom of the article was a new detail. A detail that had not existed earlier. Someone had anonymously claimed that my disappearance was connected to information hidden inside a decades-old family record. I stared at the words, confused. What does that even mean? Adrian's eyes met mine. The concern I had noticed earlier returned immediately. That, he said quietly, is exactly what I intend to find out. The moment I read those words, a chill moved through me that had nothing to do with the weather outside. A decades-old family record. I looked at the article again, hoping I had misunderstood. The sentence remained exactly the same. Anonymous sources claimed my disappearance was somehow connected to information buried in documents dating back more than 20 years. This is ridiculous, I said. My family is completely ordinary. Adrian remained silent. That worried me. Adrian. His eyes lifted to mine. What? Tell me you agree this is ridiculous. He exhaled slowly. I think someone wants attention focused on you. Why? That is the question. The room suddenly felt smaller. A few hours ago, my biggest problem had been a canceled wedding. Now strangers were publishing stories about my family and attaching mysterious rumors to my name. None of it made sense. Margaret sat beside me and gently squeezed my shoulder. You should get some sleep. I laughed softly. I do not think sleep is happening tonight. Probably not, she admitted. Adrian's phone rang again. This time he answered. He listened quietly for nearly 30 seconds. His expression never changed, but something in the room shifted. The atmosphere became sharper, more focused, more serious. When the call ended, he set the phone down carefully. What happened? I asked. Someone has been searching public archives using your name. My stomach dropped. My name? He nodded. And the names of your parents. I stared at him. Who? We do not know yet. Every answer seemed to create 3 new questions. I stood and walked toward the windows. Rain continued falling across the city below. Thousands of lights stretched toward the horizon. Normally the view would have been beautiful. Tonight it felt distant. Unreal. My parents are school teachers, I said quietly. They live in Ohio. They spend weekends gardening and arguing about football. There is no secret family mystery. Adrian watched me carefully. I believe you. Then why does everyone else seem convinced there is one? He did not answer immediately. Finally, he stood and walked closer. Because people rarely search for something unless they think it exists. I hated how reasonable that sounded. The silence that followed lasted several seconds. Then another thought hit me. I turned toward him. That folder. Adrian's expression became unreadable. What folder? The one you received downstairs. He already knew which one I meant. When you opened it, you looked surprised. I was. Why? He studied me for a long moment. Then, to my surprise, he answered. Because your name appeared inside. My heart skipped. What? It should not have. Suddenly every sound seemed distant. The rain. The city. The hum of the lights. You are saying my name was already in your files? Adrian nodded once. Yes. I stared at him. Then explain it. His gaze shifted briefly toward the skyline before returning to me. For the first time since we met, he looked genuinely conflicted. I cannot. Cannot or will not? His jaw tightened slightly. Both. Frustration surged through me. I had spent the entire day reacting to other people's decisions. Other people's secrets. Other people's explanations. That is not good enough. Adrian took a step closer. Not threatening. Not intimidating. Just direct. I know. The honesty caught me off guard. Before either of us could say another word, a notification appeared on the large television mounted across the room. The screen illuminated automatically with breaking news. My photograph appeared again. This time alongside another image. An old photograph. Faded. Grainy. Nearly impossible to see clearly. Yet the woman in the picture looked strangely familiar. My breath caught. Adrian turned toward the screen at the exact same moment I did. Neither of us spoke. Because beneath the photograph was a caption that changed everything. Missing since 2003. Last known connection to the Romano investigation. There are moments when the world seems to tilt beneath your feet. That photograph did exactly that. I moved closer to the television, barely aware of the silence filling the room behind me. The image was old. Grainy. Time had faded most of the details. Yet something about the woman's face felt painfully familiar. Not because I recognized her. Because I recognized pieces of her. The shape of her eyes. The curve of her smile. Features that looked disturbingly similar to my own. My pulse hammered in my ears. "Who is she?" I whispered. Nobody answered immediately. When I turned around, Adrian was staring at the screen with an expression I had never seen before. Not concern. Not caution. Recognition. "Adrian." My voice came out sharper this time. "Who is she?" He looked at me for several seconds before finally speaking. Her name was Eleanor Hayes. The name meant nothing to me. "And why is she connected to your family?" Adrian glanced toward Margaret. She looked equally unsettled. Finally, he exhaled slowly. "Because 23 years ago, Eleanor Hayes helped expose financial corruption involving several powerful families." "What does that have to do with me?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "She disappeared before she could testify publicly." The room felt colder. I looked back at the photograph. "You are saying she vanished?" "Yes." "Then why is my picture being shown beside hers?" No one answered immediately. That silence told me everything. They had theories. They simply did not want to say them aloud. My hands trembled slightly. "Tell me." Adrian walked toward the television and muted the broadcast completely. The reporters continued speaking without sound. Their faces moved while the city lights reflected through the windows behind us. "There is something else you need to know." The seriousness in his voice made my stomach drop. "Go on." He hesitated. Adrian Romano actually hesitated. Then he looked directly into my eyes. "The reason your name appeared in those files is because someone connected Eleanor Hayes to your family years ago." I stared at him. "That is impossible." That was my reaction too. My parents never mentioned anyone named Eleanor. Perhaps they did not know. Or perhaps this entire thing is wrong. The possibility sounded weaker the moment I said it. Adrian remained silent. Margaret folded her arms. Nobody looked convinced. I suddenly remembered every family gathering from my childhood. Every awkward moment when relatives changed subjects unexpectedly. Every time questions about the past were answered vaguely. Things I had dismissed as ordinary suddenly felt different. "No," I whispered. "This cannot be real." Adrian stepped closer. His voice softened slightly. "Sophie, whatever this is, you are not facing it alone." The words surprised me more than they should have. Because for the first time all day, I believed him. The realization hit me unexpectedly. Somewhere between the church, the rain, the headlines, and the impossible mystery unfolding around me, I had started trusting the one person I should probably fear the most. My eyes drifted back toward the television. The broadcast had moved to another image. This one showed a faded document partially. Recovered from public archives. Most of the text was blurred. Only one section remained clearly visible. A single handwritten note. The camera zoomed closer. My breath stopped. Adrian noticed immediately. "What is it?" I pointed toward the screen. The handwriting looked old. Delicate. Fading with age. Yet one sentence remained perfectly readable. One sentence that made every question in the room suddenly feel much larger. "If anything happens to me, find the girl and tell her the truth." Some truths do not arrive with certainty. They arrive with a single sentence that refuses to leave your mind. I stared at the screen while those handwritten words seemed to echo through the room. Find the girl and tell her the truth. The reporters continued talking without sound. The city continued shining beyond the windows. Yet everything felt frozen. "The girl," I whispered. "They think that is me." Adrian did not answer immediately. He did not need to. We both already knew. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of phone calls, archived records, and questions nobody expected to ask. For the first time in my life, my parents told me a story they had hidden for more than 2 decades. Eleanor Hayes had been my biological aunt. The woman in the photograph. The woman who disappeared before revealing information that powerful people wanted buried forever. When my mother was young, Eleanor had left behind a collection of documents and a final request. Protect the child. At the time, nobody knew exactly what she meant. Years later, after tragedy touched several branches of the family, my parents chose silence over attention. They changed cities, built a quiet life, raised me far away from old headlines and forgotten investigations. They never imagined the past would find its way back. Neither did I. Yet somehow it had. The mystery that consumed national attention slowly unraveled over the following weeks. Independent journalists uncovered records that had been overlooked for years. Historians pieced together timelines. Facts replaced rumors. And once facts appeared, the speculation surrounding me began to disappear. The headlines changed. The accusations faded. The public moved. On to newer stories. They always do. Through all of it, Adrian remained exactly where he had been from the beginning. Calm. Steady. Present. He never tried to control my decisions. He never pushed me toward answers I was not ready to face. Instead, he stood beside me while I found them myself. One evening, nearly 2 months after the day I ran from my wedding, I stood on the same terrace overlooking Manhattan. Summer had replaced the rain. Warm air drifted across the skyline. The city glowed beneath a sky full of fading gold light. Adrian stepped outside carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to me without a word. We stood quietly for several moments. The silence felt comfortable now. Familiar. You know, I said finally, this is not how I imagined my life would look. Most worthwhile stories rarely go according to plan. I smiled. That sounds suspiciously wise. Margaret says that means I am getting old. I laughed softly. The sound surprised even me. There had been a time when I thought laughter might never feel natural again. Adrian leaned against the railing. Your school called earlier. What happened? They want you back in September. Relief washed through me. Teaching had always been home. That is good news. I thought so. We watched the city lights flicker on one building at a time. Finally, I looked toward him. There is something I never understood. Only one thing? Why did you stop that day? Adrian knew exactly which day I meant. The church. The rain. The black SUV. The beginning of everything. His expression softened. Do you want the official answer? No. Good. It is boring. I waited. Adrian looked out across the skyline before speaking. The truth is that when I saw you standing there, something felt familiar. My heartbeat quickened. Familiar. He nodded. Not because I knew who you were. His eyes met mine. Because you looked like someone standing at the edge of a life that no longer belonged to her. The words settled quietly between us. I understood them because I had lived them. And you decided to help? Adrian smiled slightly. You looked like you needed an exit. I laughed. That is still a terrible explanation. Perhaps. He set his coffee down. Then, after a brief pause, he added, but it is the truth. For a moment neither of us spoke. The city stretched endlessly around us. Beautiful. Complicated. Unpredictable. Much like life itself. I thought about the wedding I never had. The future I lost. The mystery that changed everything. Then I thought about the strange chain of events that led me here. Sometimes the end of one story is simply the beginning of a better one. The church bells had once sounded like the collapse of my future. Now they felt like the first note of a life I never expected to find. And standing beside Adrian Romano beneath the lights of New York City, I realized something simple. The day I ran away was not the day everything fell apart. It was the day everything finally began.